It is January 27th, 2025. We are talking about Parshat Bo this morning in our class here, Parshat Bo. But you can't detach Parshat Bo from Parshat Va'era, which we had last week. And I guess you can't detach Parshat Bo from Bishalach, which is next week, although I'll be focusing more on Parshat Bo. Um, I've been very taken by this whole question, which I began last week, of the structure of the plagues. And if you saw my sheet on Shabbat, I presented several different schema for how the 10 plagues are organized. To wit, the classical organization of 3, 3, 3, and 1, which is the organization that we are most familiar with from the Passover Haggadah, Ditzach Adash Be'achav, and we don't say Be'acha. We group the last four as four, understanding that the 10th plague really is on its own. So 3, 3, 3, and 3, or 2, 2, 2, 2, and 2, five groups of two, or two groups of five, or as I argued, that there's one group of seven and one group of three, and that grouping is actually fashioned by the organization of the parshas themselves, because Parshat Bo gives us seven plagues, and Parshat Va'era gives us seven plagues, and Parshat Bo gives us three plagues, and um, this is not a great revelation, other than to say that as I argued on Shabbat, you know, beautiful stories, complex stories, rich stories lend themselves to several kinds of organizations and several kinds of thematic frames. That's what makes a beautiful story. That's what makes a very rich and complex experience. You could apply that idea to a film you see. Um, Films do have a certain formula to it. Act one, act two, act three. We have the experience. If we studied Shakespeare a little bit, we know that Shakespearean plays follow a certain pattern. I forget exactly what the crisis is in the third act, and the climax comes in the fifth act. But you could argue that there's actually much more going on, and within any given biblical story, there is so much richness and so much going on in terms of the words and the parallels and the different phrases and all of that. Um, so we found that the first seven plagues are one unit, and the second three are another unit, culminating in the tenth plague, the plague of the firstborn, which we are going to read this week. I want to just take a moment to show, more or less how this kind of blocks out, and to kind of give you the visual, since we're in a visual medium, uh, to have the experience of seeing the text, more or less. I'm not going to say in the Torah, because there's one flaw here, which is that I couldn't get my program to go uh, right to left. Um, so the Hebrew actually goes left to right here, but we start in the left side where I have preamble, and we're going to the right. I just didn't want to spend hours to try and figure that out. So with that small flaw, you see, I have here, this is a 1 8.5 by 11 sheet in a word processing program in Microsoft Word, and I made it as 6 point, and there are 3,388 words here from basically chapter 7 of Exodus 7, chapter 7, verse 1, all the way to chapter 12, 13, I think it is, to chapter 13. So there are 3,000 some odd words, 3,300 words here. Um, And I just want to show you, just by looking at it, you see, okay, so it starts out with this preamble. This is the serpent, the plague of blood, the plague of frogs, right? It goes into the second column here. Lice, very small, swarms, bigger, pestilence, boils, big on boils, hail, which I said that's the seventh plague, and it is for all intents and purposes the most text. There's the largest text, and I had that on my sheet last week, the statistics of all the different texts. Locust, which is a very large text also. Darkness, small. Firstborn, quite large, except for the fact that we have all sorts of things put in there in terms of the Passover story, etc. Um, what I have highlighted in yellow, I'm going to just, put on, I have a different sheet for that. Um, and that is the different times that the Torah tells us, well, what's the purpose of this? Okay. So, for example, I'm going to just highlight this here as much as I can. וידעו מצרים כי אני אדוני בנתתי את ידי על מצרים והוצאתי את בני ישראל מתוכם. I have that translated elsewhere, but it's so that the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. Okay, and that the purpose of the plagues is essentially to convey to Egypt, I'm God. I'm 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 the power of the universe. And we see similar phrases in the different plagues, and not all the plagues have this, but blood has this. Bezot teda, this with this you will know I am God. And then with the frogs, it's Leman teda, that you should know that there's no one else like God. With lice, doesn't say swarms, it says Vifleti leman teda, so that you will know that I am God in the land. One second, Marlene. And then with regard to, we have this kind of statement with hail, Bavur teda, so that you should know that there's no one else like me in the land. And with locusts, that you will be able to tell. And we'll talk about them in a second. I'm going to stop sharing here and I will get to Marlene. Go ahead, Marlene.
Is there a bifurcation here? God says, so that they will know, the Egyptians, but now it's till you shall know. Is God telling the Jews who he is, or is he telling them?
Wow, you anticipated my whole class here. All right, so we're gonna get to that. Just hold that for a second, and I'm just gonna show you how this is charted out here in various ways. But that's where I'm going, okay? Because there are two addressees here for this, and that is not something that is noticed by most of us, especially when I said last week, we tend to just kind of zip through them, at that part of the Seder without having any exposure to that rich organization of the literature, which is what you see in chapters 7 through 12, right? It's the very complicated organization of a text that, I'd love it to be simple and I'd love it to be able to rattle off, but there's just so many little layers to it that it makes it very, very difficult, and that's possibly what's being sought after here. So here I'm just going to put up this chart, which has those verses quite enlarged, so that we can see. So with the plague of blood, it's bezot teda. By this you shall you know, right? And what my little thesis here is that the further we get into the plagues, the larger the aperture, the focus is. The diameter of the scope is much wider. Okay, so with blood, it's you shall know, but with frogs, it's in order that you may know there is none like the Lord our God. So it's you shall know I am the Lord. Okay, so I'm saying that's a kind of you, me, I am God. It's it's a kind of limited knowledge. There's none like the Lord. It's a little more. It's a wider. with regard to swarms, or that's a rove, it's uh, in order that you may know that I'm the Lord of the land. Okay, so we have a bigger, wider scope. With the hail, with the warning, it's "En kamoni b'chol haaretz." There's none like me in throughout the land. Okay, and the did I record? Recording it? Yes, I'm recording. There's none like me throughout the land. Okay, and then with the second time in hell, it's that you should recount my name throughout all the land. So it's like everybody should know about me. And then um, in order that you may know that the land belongs to the Lord, it's like, okay, now I have possession over it. With locusts, you may recount the hearing of your child and your child's child. This is what we'll talk about. It's slightly different. In order that you may know that God makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel, that's the firstborn. Okay, so you can see then, and in the way that I've showed you here, and it's hard to chart it out without having the text in front of us and really kind of doing the holding the text and showing this, but in the first seven plagues, we have, I think, an expansion of the radius of how God is to be known. And in the last three, it's more intimate, as we are intimating here. Go ahead, Dear John.
So I have a question.
Yes.
Somewhere in the middle, they use the word land. So my question is, what land is he talking about?
Land, of course, has a lot of 1 second, and then has a lot of semantic range. So, is it the land of Egypt or the entire land? And it could very well be both. I mean, it's dexterous in the sense that it's what is known. Now in antiquity, people didn't really have the concept of it's what is the universe and what is the world. The world may have been as far as they could see, really, knowing that the horizon, you could go to the horizon and you just extend yourself to the horizon. So it's big. In other words, it's a big scope. I can't define it. Yes. Nanette, go ahead.
Okay. So, hey, Rabbi, sort of in answering, well, responding to Marlene, sort of, um, I have to submit that I don't think the Israelites knew about the plagues because if they did, and they saw all these incredible things that, God, the Big Macha, did, I mean, they would go willingly. They would leave Egypt willingly with Moses, but instead, he had to convince them and this and that. No? Like, what do
Well,
you think?
the plays are playing out, in the story. They are aware of it the same way that they're. I mean, the Midrash will develop this idea quite extensively in terms of what the interaction is between the Egyptians and the Israelites. But they're making a different point here. The Israelites live in a certain area in Goshen. Now, the story in the Bible tells us that indeed they were sheltered from some of these things, which meant they could easily have not known. But one could argue it would have been very hard for them not to know, in that that these were catastrophes happening nearby. And that's the whole point. Why wouldn't they have gone out, or what would they have done as a consequence of it? That speaks to their limitations. And this, I guess, that's the politics of the story. The politics of the story is really, what do we do and when do we do it and who do we follow when we do it? Those are political questions. And this is a people that is, you could argue, not terribly well organized, other than their family structures and their clan structures. And even then, those structures have been damaged severely by slavery. So they're a downtrodden people that doesn't have any political framing to them. And what emerges, especially in this parsha, is leadership, Moses as the leader, and also what emerges here is the reinstitution of the family structure. We've spoken about that in the past, but just as a, to kind of review that in a sentence, it's once you get the commandment for what to do on the eve of the plague of the firstborn, it's very clear that the people are to organize themselves in their family units and that they are to collect one animal per family. That is not just about cuisine. That is not about the menu. That is about restructuring a people that's been broken back into their family. Look, I mean, this is real. We're seeing this in real time right now because four hostages were released on Saturday, the three hostages before. What happened? Okay, when you think about it. So these poor young girls were ripped away from their families, ripped away from their units, and placed in dungeons in Gaza, and now are released. What's happening in their release? They had to get taken care of. They have to get, made sure they're in good condition. So they go to hospital because they need to be looked at and taken care of and examined. Today, they were released. Where were they released? They were released to their families. Why? Well, it's obvious why. That's where else they're going to go. But what is happening on multiple levels is the restoration of their humanity through the family structure. When you saw the scenes of them holding their parents, right? Their parents hugging and kissing, and then they went to their siblings, that was saying, beyond just the obvious, here, what has been broken for 477 days is now being restored. The family bonds are being restored. That's what happens in a hostage situation or in a situation of slave servitude. And part of when you examine the cruelty of slavery, in every context, especially American slavery, what was one of the most cruel things about slavery was that no concern was given to the family structures. Often these families were completely destroyed. Slave families, children were sold, away from parents, spouses, husbands, wives, etc. Because when you are chattel to someone else, you're that takes precedence over the family bond, and that in our observation, is, of course, is the ultimate cruelty to destroy the family bonds. So here, um, they are they're moving through that. Now let me go back to these the the series here. So I I I'm very interested in the way that this idea of who's the address of the plagues is playing itself out. Um, for the sake of uh, uh, presentation, I wanted to share this video. It's in Hebrew, but I have a translation of it. Well, I'm going to do 3 minutes of it in Hebrew, and then we'll do the translation of it. So those of you who have a little better Hebrew will enjoy this. Those of you who don't, sorry about that. And but we'll get it explained, and I think it helps relate the idea. This is I've been I'm a big fan of Jonathan Grossman, and he has a lecture in Hebrew, and he says as follows. Here we go. So here we go. Not only giving a special place to the place of Barat. I'm gonna stop that and put up the transcript here in English so that so we could put this on at the same time. Just a minute. Uh, okay, here we go. So let's share this. I'm gonna play him in the background and roll the transcript for us, okay? And I'm just gonna hang on, just do this. So complicated, these things. Here we go. I'm playing him in the background, and you'll read this.
התחושה היא שהכל היה צריך להסתיים פה, ומשום מה לא.
It should have ended here, and that should be a
נדמה לי
reason.
שהפתרון היותר טוב,
I think the better reason
מה
is
קורה כאן פתאום, מה מתחדש פה פתאום,
to see
בשלוש
what
המכות
new thing is
האחרונות,
arising here suddenly.
שלא ניתן היה להסתפק רק בשבע הראשונות,
When the first 7 plagues would have been sufficient for us in order to test
את
this,
הפתיחה לשלוש האחרונות. כלומר, את תחילת פרשת בו.
the first. Okay.
ושם אולי נעוץ איזה סוד גדול.
We could
למה
extract some
צריך
big
עוד
secret as
סריה
we
של
need
שלוש
another
מכות?
series of 3 plagues.
אז אני קורא.
I'm going to just stop that for a second because he's saying, look, when you think
תחילת
about
פרשת
it,
בו.
the
כלומר, פרק י'.
when you think about it, 7 plagues would have been enough. Okay, the fact is that the 7th plague is really a horrible, horrible plague. You know, and as I mentioned this past Shabbos, you know, wow, it was so devastating. It was like really carpet bombing of Egypt. You would think that would have been enough, and they don't need the next 3 plagues, except for the fact that Pharaoh himself, you know, he said, I've sinned, and then he reverses himself. He reverses himself on the 7th plague. It's not that God reverses him, he reverses himself, okay? So the question he's asking is, so you have these 7, and we know that there's an organization of 7. It's not just because of aesthetic purposes that we have it, but there's a narrative purpose to this. The narrative purpose, I'm just going to cue you into this to listen to him. He's saying, look, the first part is a part that tells one story to them, and the second part is telling another story to us, okay? And with that, I'm going to, now what do you see on your screen? Do you see the text, the transcript, or do you see Grossman?
The transcript.
Good, okay? So read the transcript. I'm going to just, here we go. God said to Moses, go to Pharaoh, for I made his heart and the heart of his servants heavy with stubbornness, in order that I may put these signs among them, and in order that you may recount in the hearing of your child and your child's child, and my signs which I placed upon them, that you may know that I am God. The surprise, the novelty is in the open. If up until now, if it was the story of the Egyptians, they should know I'm God. All of a sudden, there's a hugely important fact of the story. You need to recount it to you should know. All of a sudden, eve of the last series, the last triad, that there are additional underseas to the plagues. The educational process that the plagues brings associatively is not only addressed to Egypt, but also to Israel. Before the plague of hail, last 7 of them, but God said, rather, I want to show you my pain for the sake of spreading them into the land. That would be the story. The Egypt story of this here, it's to tell in the ears of your son. This is an intimate story that a father tells his son before bed. This is not all that. This is another story. There are 2 stories here. One story of a theological revolution, world story. Another education of Israel, that I know that I'm God. Oh, okay, I'm going to stop it there. This is, I thought that's a valuable insight, okay? And I'll tell you what, I mean, I'll say it only because, wow, you know, it's not something that I've paid attention to before. So I think that that's valuable. Okay, it's very, 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 you know, egotistical. But you know, okay, so in humility you say, all right, so you read this every year, you read this story every year, and you read the Haggadah twice a year, you know, and you breeze through it, and we have a lot of fun with it, and, you know, that's wonderful. But on the subtlety, there's something going on here. In fact, what he's saying is that in this story, there are two, I'm going to say two addressees, and there are two parallel narratives. One story, and I'll make it the most polemical I can make it. One story is a universal story, and one story is a particular story. Isn't that interesting? One story is directed to everyone, spread my name throughout the world, and one story is directed to us, which is tell your children, tell your children about my signs and about what I've done. And this is the experience you have with this story is that it's a personal story. And I'm not sure exactly, how to kind of digest this insight because on the one hand, I want to share the universal story too. I'm this is my this is part of the what I'm telling my children is everything else. But the intimate story, framed of course as father to child, but it's any parent to child, obviously, is the intimate story is we had this experience and this is ours. And I'll just give you one little extra facet, which is, so again, it's very hard to read and to study our stories in the Torah here with blinders as to the world. And I keep going back to this idea that we're living in a big story that's unfolding, right? And on the one hand, uh, this is a world story, what's going on in Israel, and it's our story. I'll give you just one other example of it. You may have seen the article in the New York Times this, I think, Sunday, Friday, or I see it online, so I don't know when it's published. But there was an article about Anne Frank. This is Holocaust Remembrance Day, and the universalization of Anne Frank and how that distorts a very important aspect of the story, which is, she was a Jew. And, you want to make Anne Frank into the universal symbol of suffering and persecution, except for the fact that if you do that, you eliminate the reason why she was persecuted, which was because she was Jewish. Go ahead, Marlene.
I would like to go back to the plagues for a moment.
Yes.
The Jews were living in the no-fly zone. Until the plague of darkness, they were not participating in Dam Svardeya. It didn't come to them. So we don't know, we're not told how Moshe got the word out to the Jews that this is what was happening.
And here, I need my time machine. I I like everyone would, I I used to have there was a professor at the seminary would say I'd give 4 chapters of the Book of Chronicles for just one little outtake, of this, right? And he's not wrong in the sense that wouldn't it be great if we had just one extra detail here, and perhaps we could say, without getting into the whole can of worms, which is so the story is telling a story to us, and we will once we kind of we want so much for this story to be reality, and for what the Torah is telling us to be what is unfolding here. But as I've shown many times, the narrator has, let's say, the narrator has his own objective, and it's framing the story in a way to teach, ideas here about God and the world, and therefore, on a question of, well, what did they know, when did they know it, how did they know? It's really my imagination versus your imagination, or and what sources we can muster to prove our case as opposed to another case. That's a useful method of study, which is here's the proposition. The proposition is you're stating they didn't know what was going on elsewhere, and my counter to that was how could they not have known? right? They must have known, right? And how could they not have known? It's, and I'm making an assumption just as you are. My assumption is that the world is small and that news travels. And not only that, but my assumption is that the world is small and the news travels, and there is some kind of interaction between Egyptians and Israelites. Because there has to be, because the Egyptians are the overlords and the Israelites are the slaves. And so, like any human situation, and again, we'll just turn to Gaza, and say, what's fascinating to me is that while these girls were in, caves and tunnels for months, somehow, at some point, they knew what was going on. Someone opened a radio for them. Someone opened a television. It's amazing to see this, that they heard their parents saying, "If you're listening, I am with you." They heard that. That's just mind blowing. Okay, so, and of course, this is technology, and this is this is not super technology, but this is you know so you ask yourself, if there's a human interaction between an overlord, a taskmaster, Egyptian taskmaster, who only wants to go home, and is tired of being a brutalizing person and smacking Israelites all day, and would say out of the corner of his mouth, saying, you're causing us all these problems. Because of you, we couldn't drink from the Nile last week, or because of you, we couldn't, there were frogs, what's that smell, because of you. And so I'm bringing a certain, suitcase of assumptions to the text, as everyone does. Okay, we got John, we got Ruth, and we got Bob. Go ahead, John.
Well, what this discussion brings to mind is the Germans and the Jews during the 1930s.
Yeah.
The Germans said we didn't know what was going on, but we all think they did know.
Yeah, of
Uh,
course they did. And you had people who, lots and lots of stories about this. My one that comes to mind, Rabbi Gunter Plaut, who was really one of the eminent rabbis in Canada, head of the rabbi of the Reformed Synagogue Holy Blossom, and he was a chaplain I think it was a chaplain in the U.S. Army. He went on to become the editor and writer of his commentary, the Bible, and he describes in a memoir and in an interview of how, as he was a chaplain, and he had a rank, so he could order civilians, and that when it came to the camp that he had liberated, his unit had liberated, they went to the mayor of the town, and of course the town, they all pretended that they didn't know anything, and he said, you need to dispatch and deploy teams of people who are going to help bury the dead here, and they resisted, and they made all sorts of excuses, and he said, I don't care if you have to go to your kitchen drawer and take a spoon. Every single person in this town is going to help bury the dead here. You cannot tell me that you didn't know. And that's in real time, right? And the idea that I don't care, you go get a spoon if you need to dig. That's the power here. Okay, and so yeah, the question is, what is known, what is not known, and it has all the plausible deniability, because, well, we didn't see it, but everybody saw it. Ruth, go ahead.
I think it's quite plausible that they didn't know what was going on. I mean, look, right here in this Zoom, we have 3 people from Canada. Canada is our next door neighbor.
Yes.
Some people refer to it as our 51st state because they don't know any better. Okay. How much, and you've said this yourself, Rabbi, how much do Americans know about Canada? Okay. So they may not have known.
So look, but the fact is that I could answer you. The evidence proves the point, which is there. We have information, and we show that it's not hermetically sealed. On the contrary, you know, if we could spend hours and hours telling you everything you need to know about it, and it's all available. And the fact that it's in the news the way it is illustrates, your point, which is, nobody really knows about it. On the other hand, I mean, we understand. I mean, at least I understand this as a kind of trolling. This is a kind of prodding and a kind of annoyance, in the sense that we want to elicit, shape a different kind of economic relationship between the two countries. And all you need to know about Canada as an American is that you'll need to know is that you'll be able to get a lot of cheaper energy from Canada, and B, all your delicious cucumbers and tomatoes at Costco in its season come from Ontario. Okay, Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, first, I very much appreciate regarding the plagues, you're talking about what they may mean to the Jewish people, both collectively but also individually. And I just wanted to share an interesting Hasidic perspective on hail that I had never heard before, which was that in some ways it represents the punishments that relate to the major sins of murder, idolatry, and infidelity, in terms of being stoned, of burning, of strangling, and all the things that are going on that kind of precede what's to come later in terms of the things you should not engage in. So I wondered on your perspective of the meaning of hail itself, both its shape, the burning inside, the frozen on the outside,
Yeah.
the power.
So I think, I've never paid attention to it as much as I have on this go through. I gave a little wild speculation that hail actually, because it's fire and closed ice, or ice and fire together, which it kindles the imagination. Sorry, the pun. For in terms of opposites, but there's only one other thing in the Bible that has fire and vapor together, and that is the cloud that accompanies Israel through the desert. So I thought, interesting. Ice is a frozen cloud, and there's fire in the ice, so it could be that this is coming down. The cloud, the protective cloud of God, is coming down and wreaking punishment, and that's I think a speculation. It's you would have that with a glass of wine and say, yeah, that's interesting. I asked my Shalashudas crowd what they thought about it, and I got a thumbs down from everybody. Okay, well, all right. So we can go
Rabbi?
to, yes, just a second. Go ahead, Marlene. Yeah.
That's also the scientific look at the Magen David. The scientific signs for fire are a triangle going up, and water is a triangle going down, and they're together.
Far be it from me to quibble about the range of meaning that we can get from symbols, and that's where we're going here. We have a symbolic statement here that's being read and decoded in different ways. I'll give you one more example, which is the commentaries pick up on this, that plague is the hail kind of represents all of the different plagues, and because it's the seventh, and it's situated in opposite to all of them. And it does say kol magafotai, all my plagues, with regard to that plague. And what's in it? There's fire, there's water, and there's wind, and that's creation. And so this commentator is saying that because you have these different elements there, you're getting the entire havoc of creation kind of upended, the same way that you would say, these punishments for all of those, they happen to be violations of the Ten Commandments,
Right.
Are reflected in hail. And what we get out of that is good, rich conversation as to what the meaning of a symbol is. Okay. Now let me go back to this idea of the narrative, okay? And that there's one narrative that is being played out for Egypt and another narrative that's being played out for Israel. If you go back to just my first slide, which is the picture of the text, so I just want to show you in terms of what it looks like in terms of the how everything kind of looks in the Torah basically. Okay, and it's useful because we're visual here to see a text laid out like this. So here, once again, is this slide. So if you were to open up a scroll, you could it's exaggerating to say that this is kind of what it looks like, but this is the quantity of text that we're talking about. In the yellow, I have these things which I mentioned are the you shall know, you shall know. And I'm going from right to left, not left to right. But in the green and in the purple, I have green is where things that are familiar to us from the Haggadah, which is when your child asks you, and that's personal narrative. That's the intimate narrative. That's what's going on. Father, parent to child, basically. And you see in the course of, and I'll make the screen small. So you see, in the course of this whole story, which is 3,000 words, you have these three sections which include a narrative to a child. Okay, I'm going to just put up another thing now because I think this is we have to understand. We experience the story in at least two different ways in the course of the Jewish year. This is my little theme, which is we're reading it and studying it in the Torah, and very rich, text, complicated structure, blah 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 blah, lots of narratives and language things going on here. But we also liturgize it by the Seder. And it's only one little aspect of the Seder, and that's how most of us interact with this story, which is the spilling of wine for every plague and the whole list, and the acronym, the Tzach Hadash Be'achav. That's our limit. And I'm going to give credit to creative educators such as the ones that are with us, including me, Marlene, and others, who have said, okay, what can we do, to make this exciting at the Seder? And we have all sorts of games and toys and things that we do to reflect all the plagues. I mean, I've had ping pong balls at the Seder and little frogs, and I've had Jello crystals that I say, here, this is now. Yeah, there you go. Right, exactly. So
What about the snake?
I gave a snake, and I have we had a lot of fun when the kids were little, playing this out on their level. And that's great, okay? But we're trying to say, well, there are two stories here. And of course, the central text in the Haggadah about telling is the four sons, the four children, and we'll just kind of remind people that text emerges from these texts around the plagues and in these chapters here. So you have this one, this is the Deuteronomy text, which is the Chacham. When your child asks you on the morrow, what mean the precepts, laws, regulations that God has commanded you, then you say, Avadim Ayulim Mitzrayim, signs importance, he took us out of there, etc. And then you have this one from the second son, when you are here. Vayaki yishalcha bincha machar mazot. So who is mazot? That's the Tom. When you have the third child, is vigarata levincha bayamahu, which is that's the fourth child. This is the child that does not know how to ask. Okay, so I had the first two children in the earlier. My point is that from the beginning of the narration of the story in the Torah, you have the obligation to tell the story. That somehow there was an understanding that this was not only something that we were going to kind of just enact through symbols and monuments, as it were, but it has to be part of an ongoing narrative tradition. And there's a reason for that. The reason is because by narrating your story constantly, you're building resilience. And I want to just take the last few minutes to put up a speaker who is, at least to me, of late has been identified with this idea of storytelling in families as the creator of resilience. The fellow is Marshall Duke. He's a professor of psychology at Emory University. Some of you may have heard of him. He actually happens to be a friend of Diane Hoffman. So we talked about his wife was at Barney's funeral, and I said, maybe we get him to come and speak. He would be a great speaker for us, Marshall Duke. Is it, nice Jewish guy, Emory University, Atlanta. Not too terribly well known, but let's get him up here and hear what he has to say. I'm gonna put this on here, the share. This is his TED Talk. And let's see. Give it another.
Raised without pain, things happen. But it used to be that things happened that weren't so big as 9/11. They happened. But 9/11 happened. We live in a world where terrible things can happen. So the strategy for raising children and for living is different now. It's not trying to avoid problems. It's being able to deal with them when they occur. How do we build resilience?
That's his question.
And I spent 10 years studying this question, how do we build resilience?
Okay, just want to let this question sit in. It's the educational challenge of, I don't want to say it's of the time, but it's the, one of the most significant educational challenges that we have. Go ahead.
Going beyond just sort of being and hoping that nothing happens to making ourselves capable of absorbing the kinds of things that can happen in this world, both as adults and as children and as families. And the answer, which is a very long talk, but if I only have a few minutes, I can tell you the answer is, and you would not imagine that this would be the case, the answer is establishing yourself as a transgenerational person. That is...
I'm going to just pause there. He says it's establishing yourself as a transgenerational person. That's a new concept for us. You hear the word trans and you go like, what? No, transgenerational person, meaning I am part of, the continuity of generations. Okay, I know that, but thank you. This is kind of expressing and putting into, terminology things that now make sense to me. Go ahead, here.
Is learning about the history of your family. Learning about the history of your family and where you fit in to the context of this family, which has, when you learn the stories of the family, a oscillating history. If you ask your family, you will find that they have had good times and bad times intergenerationally. Your grandparents may have had rough times, your parents may have had, but the history of an oscillating family is one in which good things happen and bad things happen.
So oscillating history, all right? We all have that, and we are all part of this in our lives, but we have to communicate that in story.
But the lesson from the oscillating family is that although bad things happen, we come back from them. And when we hear the stories of our family, we also learn about heroes in our family, which give us reason to believe that we are special and we are capable and we're competent and we survive. And that's adaptational health or adaptational wellness.
Okay, so we have a few very interesting concepts here: the transgenerational person, adaptational health. Okay, and that we are, learning our resilience by understanding that we have access to figures in our immediate family, in our own circles, who have overcome oscillating histories.
This takes work.
Thank you.
And so you need to see that as something that you have to do just like exercise. Relational wellness.
This is interesting. Relational wellness.
Relational wellness. At last count, I had, I think, about 11 friends. I've talked to people much younger than I am who have thousands. And I feel terrible. Friends, the people that we turn to when there is trouble in our lives, when we need to adapt, when we need to cope, when we need a moment of pause. Friends. Relational wellness means that among all those friends, there are some friends. From among all those people that we are connected with on Facebook and other things like that, which I think are tremendous things that I don't understand. But nonetheless, they are wonderful opportunities to communicate with other people, but they don't replace time with others. We used to have this notion of quality time in raising children. People would say, well, I'm going to go home and toss a ball with my son between my meetings at work. And that's quality time. It turns out that when we ask people who've spent lots of time with children, that they tell us that children didn't differentiate quality time from time. Time with mom, time with dad was quality time. It didn't matter really what the parents were doing. Well, time with people is different from time texting people. There's something called an interpersonal reflex. There's something that we have which is evoked when we're with another person. It happens to you when the door opens on an elevator and someone else walks in. If you're alone in the elevator, just leaning against the back wall like this, and the door opens and a human being walks in and you go like this. I am now here as a person, and I am here ready to relate to you. That's different from me at the back wall. Well, in many ways, relational wellness means exposing yourself to as many situations as possible wherein you're not at the back wall, that you have to look a certain way, your facial expressions have to be attended to, and you have to watch the other person you're with. This is relational wellness, and it's more than friends on Facebook.
I'm going to stop there only because it goes on, and it's all fascinating, and it'll take us away from kind of the focus here, but I'm going to make the claim here that the story obviously has a theological predicate. We're here to tell the story so that we know that God is the God of the universe, God is the God of the land, tell my name throughout the land, etc. And we're here to create resilience among a people. And so while it's not articulated in those particular terms here, the outcome, I think, is proven. Here we are, people 4,000 years later, who has, sustained itself primarily on the basis of a master story, because it understood, those 3-4 commandments of telling, and understood that at the heart of the private part of the 10-plague story is that you should tell this to your children, and that because we are immersed in this moment of challenge, we are overcoming that. We are building resilience. Not only that, but we're building relationship. Not only that, but we're kind of encoding in our national immune system the capability to withstand other kinds of challenges that will inevitably come as they are right now. And so here we have the kind of moment again on the present situation, which is what we are going through is something that is larger than all of us, okay, put together. It is a world historical event. I keep saying this, as someone who is, connected to this and wrapped emotionally in the oscillation of the emotional oscillation that we are experiencing. I don't know how anybody who watching 30 seconds of this could not feel emotional oscillation with both the joy of these girls coming back to their parents and the horror and sadness that they had to endure so much pain and suffering and all of that. And so what we are now creating is a new chapter in the story that we are going to tell. And of course, how this story gets told and how this story gets commemorated and played into both monuments and museums and part of the national narrative, I think is going to be the great challenge going ahead. And all of that has we see that in the in its seeds in these chapters, because the Torah is saying you got to tell the story. You got to tell the story, and that's already as it is happening. I'm doing this so that you'll be able to tell the story to your children, and that when you go into the land, you're going to ask this, so you will explain it, so you can tell the story. And there are different ways and different methodologies and different kinds of pieces of content to it, but you will be, this is the main thing. And the reason why you tell the story is to build resilience and relationship and the ability to create the transgenerational self, to enable people to withstand and build their immunity for hardship ahead. Bob, go ahead.
I couldn't agree more strongly with what you've said and what Professor Duke has said. I would also like to build on that because besides resilience, I think one of the biggest challenges, and I'll speak here in a medical profession, but also amongst veterans, is dealing with moral injury and moral courage, which is, I think, another aspect to this story. When people were dying from COVID and they couldn't be with their families together, and healthcare people and rabbis and ministers and others had to support people, how you stand by seeing this happen. As we start seeing perhaps many innocent people being deported, what is its effect going to be beyond resilience to, in fact, dealing with moral injury that we experience, but also developing the moral courage to fight the pharaohs that are around us. So I'm just sort of wondering, can you extend, as I'm proposing, not only the resilience story, but the stories of courage and healing from these moral injuries as also part of this challenge with Pharaoh and the plagues?
Look, we're going to wade into a very, very complicated set of circumstances, in which of course there are a lot of divided opinion about what constitutes legality and illegality and criminality, etc., and what constitutes innocence and what constitutes the levels of cruelty that I think are being imagined or experienced. And I think there's a whole spectrum of it. To say to someone who committed a crime after entering the country illegally that you don't belong here, and that there's a law here, and that they are subject to the punishment of the law, is different from stripping them of their humanity and throwing them into a dungeon and not not feeding them and not keeping them out of date, torture basically. So I want to be careful about that. I think in the national conversation there needs to be an honest conversation about this, in the sense that that there probably is a way for many people to have their status here and to make that legal and to give amnesty to people who have been living here for a long time, who have done nothing wrong, who have had the accidental circumstances of their birth here. I think that there is a place for that conversation. There's a place for the other conversation. I think what we are going to experience is less nuance, more action, and that's after decades of frustration of having no policies here. Again, we ought to be very careful in terms of how we categorize the cruelty of the state here, because by no means are we like a totalitarian state, which is going to go, and torture people. On the other hand, the state has to kind of, come to its own consensus as to what constitutes a method that we're going to be favor and be sympathetic to, and what constitutes the boundary. And I don't think that answer has been clearly articulated yet. Okay. All right. Well, yes, go ahead, Skip. How you doing?
Rabbi, just, I look at this and everything that's going on from a Jewish perspective.